Our next speaker has dedicated himself for the last 6 or 7 years working with Vortex-based mathematics. We're happy to introduce to you Mr. Randy Powell.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody coming out. I hope I don't ruin it for you guys that, you probably were thinking after the last talk that doing Vortex math makes you good looking, but it doesn't always work out that way. So sorry. Okay. So I like to always begin before I say anything about myself or what I do and what I've done by giving recognition to my teacher, Marco Rodin, who, without whom I definitely wouldn't be here, and probably half the people here wouldn't be here in one way or another without his tremendous sacrifice and all the hard work he did. He discovered the equation that I'm going to talk about, about 40 years ago. So you can imagine it's been a real long road for him. I've been in this probably 7 years, and I'm pretty beat down by it too. But I'm very thankful and appreciative for him and for all his work. And a lot of people recognize what I've done and recognize me, but the truth is I really owe it to him and everything that he's done, and a lot of other people too. Our project is a very community project. People like my good friend Tyler Thurman, who's done so much video work, BJ White, who did this great animation, people doing applications like Daniel and Erica, and Russ Grease, who's here, and a whole lot of other people who aren't here. So it goes way beyond me and anything that I've done. I'm glad to just play a role and be a part of it. So that out of the way, now I'm going to talk about what it is that we do and what we've done, and what we hope to keep evolving and continue with. So this is an animation to demonstrate the property of an equation that was developed by Marco when he discovered it when he was about 16 or 17. I believe he's 58 now. So he decrypted. This is a little obscure, so I hope you don't mind, but I like to go to the obscure too, as well as the concrete, because they're all interrelated. He decrypted what's called the most great name of God in the Baha'i faith, which he is a member of. And I actually intersected with his work because of my interest in linguistics and my interest in the mathematics of language. And so Marco had that same interest as a young man, and he decrypted the equation for this name, which is said in no uncertain terms, if you ever read the writings of Baha'u'llah, who is the prophet of that faith, in no uncertain terms, he says that if you understand this word, if you understand the mathematics of this word, that it will give you the secret to every science, that it will give you the secret to an energy with which, and this was in the early 1800s when he was saying this, he said you can tap into an energy that requires no fuel and produces no fumes. And essentially Marco came up with this equation because he wanted to figure out how to pronounce the name correctly, how to actually intonate and say the name. And his reason for being interested in that is because he believed that it's actually the sounds, the language that we speak, and the sounds that we make that create our intelligence. And so he believed that making this sound in the correct way would be the secret of intelligence, and it would give him the answers to understanding the secret, hidden, protected energy of the universe. And so he developed this equation. Now let me go forward past the animation a little bit. Here you can see it with the numbers. Now this word, if you add all the numbers together, the equation for the word is 1251. I'm going to say a lot of things today that you're not going to retain, and it's okay. Don't try to understand it because that'll make it harder. You just listen to it, and then of course we're taping all this so you can go back over it. But I'm going to talk a little fast because the time is limited. Normally I go in and try to explain the math. I'm not going to do much of that today because it's just gets a little complex. But you can see the simple aspect, like many of our great mathematical equations over the ages, this is simply a cross-section of a circle, like pi or many others. It has 9 points on it, because 1, 2, 5, 1, if you add them together, they equal 9. And it was said that 9 was what represented this energy. So Marco put 9 at the top, and he drew the numbers around a circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right, according to the right-hand rule. And he knew, because of the way that the equation was, I won't go into the linguistic argument for why this is, but he knew that the 2 and the 5 were connected to the 1. So what he did is he drew a line from the 1 to the 2 and from the 1 to the 5. And every other line that you see here is simply a parallel line to one of those lines. So if you take that line from 1 to 2, you got 9 to 3, 8 to 4, 7 to 5, and then you end on 6. If you take the line from 1 to 5, you have 8 to 7, 9 to 6, of course the 1 to 5, 2 to 4, and you end on 3. So all this is simply 2 sets of parallel lines. Okay? And when you see it, immediately you realize, well, even without the coloring, which has been added in, you realize that there's 2 separate intersecting systems here. One is this, what they call the lazy 8, or the infinity symbol, or you could call it the VW. All right? Everybody's familiar with that. A lot of hippies here, I know. That circuit is essentially, it's a waveform. That's what it is. It's modeling a closed loop. It has no beginning or end. You could start it anywhere and end it anywhere. But it's simply a closed loop. It's continuous. And what we came to learn about that many, many years later is that this sequence of numbers represents the physical world of matter in motion, 3D space. Okay? Somebody asked me the other day, well, what is matter? What is mass? And we could go into lots of different thoughts about that, but essentially it's a boundary condition. Okay? It's a dividing line between one thing and another. And it always has a center, which is what this is. And this is the 0 point right here, but we'll come back to that. So if you follow this sequence, just to give you a little brief on the math, it makes a doubling pattern. 1 doubled is 2, 2 doubled is 4, 4 doubled is 8, 8 doubled, well, that's not 7, but 8 doubled is 16, so why do we have 7? Well, we're simply doing the age-old numerological, or if you want to be techno about it, you can call it digital root math or decimal parity or whatever. If you want to be new age, you can call it numerology. You add the numbers together. It's called cross addition. 6 and 1 is 7, right? 16 doubled is 32. 3 plus 2 is 5. 32 doubled then is 64. 6 and 4 is 10, and 1 and 0 is 1. I'm just going to say this quickly. 64 doubles 128, which comes back to equal 2. 256, which equals 4. 512, which equals 8. In other words, you can do that forever, and it will never break that pattern. 124875, 124875. It means that doubling, which underlies so many processes not only in mathematics, but in physics, chain reactions, our cells double at conception, which is how we've all come to be here. So it doesn't really get any more intimate or personal than that. Every single one of you came here today through a doubling process. Okay? Interestingly, though, you could say, well, is it doubling or is it halving? I don't know. Is it dividing? Is it multiplying? The truth is, all the functions of math are really one and the same. I'll give you an example. If you start with the 1, half of 1 is 0.5, right? Half of 0.5 is 0.25, which equals 7. Half of 0.25 is 0.125, which equals 8, etc. You can do that forever, and it will never stop, because it's all one and the same. It's a closed-loop circuit. It's because infinity, in our physical world of mass, is not in a straight line. Okay? Neither time nor space nor anything in the physical world moves in a straight line. It's all warp and a curve, right? And this intersects with a lot of other theories like relativity, and people may have their different thoughts about that. But essentially, this is defining a pathway for matter in motion, the path of least resistance. And numerically, that's defined by doubling. Okay, so that's one aspect of what this equation is. It's defining a doubling sequence. Now, then we have this 396. Well, what's the 396? Well, if you look into studying physics, you know, there's really only two things you can study. right? If you look up the definition of physics, it's defined as the study of matter in motion. Of course, then what is putting matter in motion? What is causing the matter to move? What is the source of time, motion, and vibration? And that's where you get to the number 9. Okay? But before I go to the number 9, I want to talk about 3 and 6. Well, what are 3 and 6? Okay? 3 and 6 represent the absolute extremes. They end in the middle of nowhere, and as an engineer friend of ours says, nothing mechanical does that. Okay? Everything mechanical connects to something else. Nothing mechanical ends in the middle of nowhere. The 3 and the 6 do that. Interestingly, 3 doubled, if you double 3, following the same process, is 6. 6 doubled is 12, 2 and 1 is 3. 12 doubled is 24, which equals 6. 24 doubled is 48, which equals 3, right? They oscillate back and forth. Now, the only thing that we know that oscillates is magnetism. And that is really essentially what this is defining. The other aspect of physics, other than matter and motion, are what we call fields, which are a lot more mysterious. You know, they have these properties like non-locality, perhaps. They seem to, in many ways, defy a lot of the boundaries we've set around what matter can actually do. Fields seem to be to have different properties, and the 9. What the 9 is a flux. We call it the etheron. Okay, we've postulated that as an ultimate fundamental particle called the etheron. Why do we call it the etheron? Well, traditionally, you know, up until the Michelson-Morley experiment, which many people contest anyway, where they tried to measure the drag of the Earth through space, and they found there was no resistance, so they said, well, there's no need to postulate an ether. All our grandparents and great-grandparents and so on and so forth, they all believed in what they called the lumiferious ether, which was supposed to be this substrate of energy distributed throughout the universe. Some people have referred to it as a loquacious jello, which I don't know what that means really, but anyway, a loquacious jello. Well, it's not a jello, it's not a media. What it is, it's a pulse, it's a surge. It moves from the center of mass outwards in all directions. And it is characterized by the fact that it's linear. And if you look at this pyramid shape, this triangle, that's what it is. It's a vector. Okay? It is the linear geometric structure which is underlying the warp and curve of space and time, which is not linear, as I said before. So it is not a static or stationary ether. It's a pulse. It sets the pace for everything else. And it is the fastest thing in the universe. Very similar to a lot of descriptions that were given this morning by the gentleman who was talking here about neutral magnetic fields. Same thing. It penetrates everything. Nothing can resist it. There's so many things. It has every attribute that you can imagine. And the interesting thing about the number 9 is, no matter what you do to it, if you multiply the number 9, for instance, 9 times 2 is 18, 9 times 3 is 27, all the numbers always equal 9. It's the never-changing number 9. And it's the only number that has that characteristic. Now, if you happen to be a mathematician, you might make an argument with me about different base systems. And if you are a mathematician, we can get into that after. I'm not going to melt everybody's head with that crap. So what we're claiming is totally the opposite and reverse of everything that's taught in the university. I'll give you a couple examples. And if you go to university, if you study mathematics, they say, well, base systems are arbitrary. You can count according to any system. You could use base 15, you could use base 5, you could use base 100. It doesn't really matter. They say we use base 10 because we have 10 fingers. Actually, we don't even have 10 fingers. Can you believe that? What we have is 0.5, which is half of 100%, and they're mirror images based on an axis. Okay, it's all optical illusions. If we had 10 fingers, your thumb would be on the other side, or on this side, right? But because they're mirror images, that's not how you actually look at it. So that's a process of halving. Okay, the number 9 is forming an axis. It's the only thing that aligns with the 0, which is the hole at the center of the donut, as Daniel and Erica were demonstrating before. All right, and I'm going to get to this shape and how we came to it, because this is my little baby. Okay, so Marco developed this equation. He started to notice a lot of interesting properties about it. Here you can see another picture of the animation showing how it moves. If I was to go back, then you can get a sense of what's going on here now. You've got a pulse moving out, expansion and contraction, And this here is defining in 2 dimensions the vortex. Okay? Here, I'm not going to go over these numbers. You know, I've got tons of videos online, and you can look up all this stuff. But essentially, this is showing how the regular old multiplication tables that we learned as kids could be the division tables as well, or addition or subtraction, because vortex-based mathematics is the unification of all the functions of math. We're doing every function of math possible instantaneously, times, divide, plus, and minus. Okay? But what you see here is that everything on opposite sides of the 9 forms bilateral symmetry. Okay? I'll just do one example. If you do multiples of 1, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Of course, 10 reduces to 1, 11 to 2, 12 to 3, and so on. Now you say, well, 8's not a mirror of 1. Well, we do notice that 1 and 8 equal 9 if you add them together, as well as 2 and 7, 4 and 5, always equal 9, as well as 3 and 6. Okay? 8, if 1 is going up in multiples of 1, that means 8's going to go down in groups of 1. So 8 times 2 is 16, 6 and 1 is 7, 8 times 3 is 24, which equals 6, 32, which equals 5, 40, which is 4, and so on. That works for every multiplication series. That's because numbers are not flat. They're not dead. They're not inert. Numbers are real. So when you go to school and they teach you that base systems are arbitrary or that numbers are arbitrary conventions made up by human beings, that's false. We're saying that numbers are real. And what does that mean? That means that numbers aren't modeling geometry. Numbers are geometry. Numbers are geometric. They define space and time literally. Okay? So this is showing how we start to get symmetry. Okay? I threw this in there because this is a very clear example of where you can see this shape, this lazy 8 or this VW, again, doesn't get more intimate than your very own DNA, which you'll see right pictures of DNA and wrong pictures of DNA. The wrong pictures of DNA are perfectly symmetrical, which is not how it actually is. It's actually offset. Okay, and you can see that shape right there. 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5. Because this is the secret of why your DNA is in a double helical spiral, and it's also the secret to the missing component that the geneticists haven't fully identified yet, though they kind of know it's there, which is that in this gap space here, which is called the major groove in genetics, is a flux field, a magnetic field. And that field, which they do know is there, their explanation is that DNA is made up of phosphates which have a negative electric charge and an associated magnetic field. But the truth is that magnetic field is controlling the switching, the expression of the genes. And I believe it's a conscious field. Okay? Here it gets more into the quantum level of the work we've done on DNA. I won't go through that too much. But here in the red is where you can see this 396. And that, by the way, we had no idea, Marco had no idea that there was a magnetic field in the major groove of DNA. He simply predicted it mathematically, and he contacted the experts in the field, and they confirmed it. So that was a successful prediction made by the math. This was the next step that happened, and I'm talking you through things that have happened over many, many years. This is where the numbers become quantized, or we take it to the quantum, the discrete level. And now what this is, it's been referred to by a lot of names. Marco likes to call it the mathematical fingerprint of God. You know, you can call it what you want. But essentially, it is now starting to give the numbers a shape. I should mention there are 3 shapes really that are specifically defined in this math. And they're pretty easy, okay? The 3, does anybody have a guess? Triangle. All right, I gave it to you. The 6, hexagon. All right, if you didn't get that one, you're... All right, and the 9, a little bit more difficult, but you can see it right here between the 0 and the 9, is a diamond. Okay, it just so happens that those are the only shapes that by themselves you can fully map and tile a 3D surface topology without any breaks. Okay, and that's very significant. So when coming up with this, what we call the diamond grain crystal lattice structure, which is seen in a lot of natural things, and I'll show you some images here in a few minutes. This map contains every mathematical function possible. Now, I said function. And this is another place where VBM, or vortex-based mathematics, I'll say VBM from now on, you know what it is. This is another place where VBM is a total 180 mirror image of conventional mathematics. Because in conventional mathematics, you have functions. The functions are held still. They're the placeholders, right? And the numbers move. They change. The truth is, numbers don't ever change. They're fixed, and they're fixed in relationship to one another. They are what we call stationary vector interstices, which is just a real nerdy way of saying that they're nodal points. Because every wave has to have a point where it stops going up and starts going down, or stops going left and starts going right. In order for something to curve, there have to be those nodal points there, and that is essentially what the numbers are defining. If you look at that equation, at each nodal point is a number. The numbers are still, and the functions move through the numbers, okay? Which is actually more what a function is. It's a movement, it's an activity. And so you can actually model every principle of physics, every type of waveform can be done here. And what this is showing is that it's a positive and negative dual coordinate system, which means that on every axis, x, y, and z, even though you can't see the z-axis, here you can see the x-axis vertical, you can see the y-axis horizontal. Okay? They each are defined by a different multiplication series, and you can always see that you have doubling at an angle, flowing at an angle, which is how things move at an angle. Nothing moves perfectly left or right, up or down. Everything moves at an angle along that pathway of positive to negative, positive to negative, positive to negative. Okay? The z-axis, the reason that you can't see it here is because it's coming from the inside out. This etheron energy moves from the center of mass. Doesn't matter if it's an atom or a galaxy or the whole universe itself, which I believe is in the shape of a torus, which is what we're going to get to next. It moves from the center of mass out in all directions linearly, as I said before. And so you're not seeing it as an x or y axis, and it took, I guess, over 30 years before I really came along and actually figured out how to calculate this in a 3D to take it out of this. But when you do it, you get this shape. And this is my baby girl that I love so much. And she's very beautiful. Because here we're now warping the axes to be circular. And this is the first mathematics. Okay, I'll give you a place why this is significant. For instance, there's something postulated in physics called black holes. You all are familiar with that. Which is postulated to be an infinitely dense. They don't even know what it is because it doesn't even make any sense. What is infinite density? And there's so much debate about it, and you can read endless heady books about it. But the reason that the black hole is thought to be infinite, and they don't really know what's happening to the information or to the matter. You know, Stephen Hawking and Susskind had a big famous debate about what happens to the information. Well, the truth is, what happens is it comes out the other side, because calculus is unable to go through the center of the donut and invert on its axis and come out the other side. It's unable to do that. It self-destructs. It just goes to infinity. But VBM is the first mathematics that's been able to do that, to actually model a full 3D that can implode at the top, as we were referring to in the last talk about the magnetic fields collapsing at the top, and to explode at the bottom. So if the Big Bang is, in fact, true, it would just simply be one of these explosions coming out the bottom. When it comes out the bottom, it expands and cools off, which is what's happening in the universe right now as we are perceiving it, because I believe we're on the southern half of the universe. Eventually, it will warp up because it is displaced, moved by this etheron energy, by the magnetic fields, and cooled off. And then eventually, it will collapse in at the top. It will be accelerated. It will be heated. And eventually, it will be condensed to an extreme density. Now, when we talk about all of these devices tapping into all this energy, we're always referring to sound. And I got into this because of my interest in sound, and because I'm a musician, and many of us are, and because I knew that sound was really behind the geometry of nature. It was the force that's symmetrizing everything. Now, conventionally, it's taught that the fastest thing traveling in the universe is light through the vacuum of space. And what I believe is actually, when you go, and some other scientists have postulated this as well, when you go into the density, exotic density of matter, where it's being compressed to the point that the escape velocity of light is no longer fast enough to escape that matter, which is why it's called a black hole, that sound, which has the complete opposite property, right? Light slows down in media, sound travels faster the more dense the media is. So sound penetrating matter near the core of a black hole, I believe, is actually transcending the speed of light. And it creates what's called a quasi-particle, is what they refer to it in quantum mechanics as. A quasi-mass particle, I believe, is how they refer to it. Some people call it hypersound. All right? And that is where that energy is emitted from. It's literally wrung out of the matter like squeezing juice out of an orange. Okay? And then it redistributes itself. It reanimates everything. It re-enlivens, recreates. Okay? It is the anti-entropic force. It is the organizing principle. Okay? Here's some more pictures of this torus. You wouldn't believe, I know it looks, you wouldn't believe what it took to actually do this, because now we're so fortunate. This is an image done by my friend Tom Barnett. The last one was done by a friend of mine, Scott Graham. I never had any of these computers or anything. I had to do this all in my head. And it really was kind of a feat in the sense that I'm lucky that I didn't die trying to do it. But, or my head didn't explode or something. But this is showing actually the southern half, which is decompressing out the bottom. Okay, so that would be your Big Bang. Here's another one. You can scale this up and down to infinity, which is what makes it fractal. Numbers themselves are a fractal, a 3D fractal. So you can look at simpler versions. This is the most basic model right here. Right? Or you can scale it. You can divide it to infinity. But you never reach the zero, because the zero is the whole. This is why absolute zero, I don't believe, really exists, because you're always decreasing in partial increments from your initial whole. So you can go colder and colder and colder and colder, right? But eventually, and this was actually proven recently, where they were showing how there was a, they thought that they went beyond absolute zero, and then showed that there was an anti-entropic force present. I don't know if anybody else read about that, but it was talked about in the universities and everything. This shape, the torus, which comes out of that equation, I believe is the ultimate fundamental shape for energy transformation, and that's what these coils are based on. Though we still have so much to learn, not only about what kind of media to use in order to harness this, and copper wire is just, you know, a primitive first step, not knocking anybody's work. Their work is absolutely excellent, and provides so much. You know, most people would think I was totally insane if it wasn't for people like Daniel and Erica, who are showing proof of concept. That, because there's nothing about electrical engineering that says the geometry of the wire would affect the output at all. Certainly not double it with no core and half the material. You know, it's insane. I mean, what all this, you know, I'm not an engineer, thank God. But so that energy is coming from the inside out, and it creates this lattice structure as it penetrates the matter. And that creates the pathway of least resistance, as they said before. I'll show you some examples here. This is actually out of a medical journal. It took me a while to find this. Luckily now, somebody must have gotten this off me, because now if you search my name or like Abha Taurus on Google, you can actually find this image. It took me years to find it. It was out of a medical journal, and these are actually images of DNA taking the shape of a torus. Okay, so it doesn't just end in the middle of nowhere. In fact, DNA even can warp and curve back into itself and create this toroidal shape, because it is the way that it's transforming energy. Here's an image of blood cells. Again, the toroidal shape. This is a cavitation bubble where they've measured, if you read the journal articles, which were up on my website. I don't have a website up at the moment. That's extreme lack of funding. I didn't have the $7 a month or whatever it costs. Inside that jet that hole, that 0 point, have been measured up to 5,000 degrees Celsius, okay, which is like the surface of the sun, and it's cool on the outside, right? That is the core principle that unifies our problem and solution to every single technology out there, which is temperature regulation. In fact, if we don't have temperature regulation, we die very quickly, okay, or we burn up. The same thing is true for the planet. The same thing is true for the galaxy, for everything. The torus is how temperature is regulated. It concentrates all the heat and energy into the center, and then it uses the magnetic fields to redistribute it and cool it down. Okay, now this is something we postulated years ago, and I was fortunate recently that some Japanese scientists confirmed this because they're actually making magnetic refrigerators now. They claim that they actually don't even know how it's working, but when you oscillate magnetic fields, you can regulate temperature. So that has actually proven to be true. There's one in weather systems we're all familiar with. There's the galaxy in the shape of a torus. Another one. Okay. There's dolphins who've been observed to using their sonar, again using the sound, creating these toroidal rings that they then expand and contract, play around with, and just another place where you see it in nature. There's the sunflower, again utilizing the hexagonal geometry and creating a toroid. Okay, here you can see the toroid where you can see the numbers a little better. There's so many things I could say about this. This was done by my friend Chuck Middaugh, and you can see here that there are numbers overlaying the other numbers, demonstrating how some of these fractal patterns work. What these numbers over the numbers are actually defining, which is the key to harnessing this technology, and I believe this is the part that we really haven't, and somebody was asking me about this earlier, this is the part that we really haven't totally tapped into yet fully, which I call, Marco originally I think coined the term underpinning nested vortices. They're like Coriolis forces, vortexes within vortexes. A good example are dimples on a golf ball. Okay, if anybody here remembers, I don't really, but if you remember back in the old days when the golf balls used to be smooth. Anybody remember that? Golf balls didn't have dimples on them. They used to be smooth. And then it was some mathematician or scientist based on tetrahedrons thing, they figured out if you put these dimples in it, it would control the flight properties, the lift of the golf ball. It would give it better slice, everything like that. And indeed, it would accelerate it and cause it to go higher and further. And that is what that principle is. If you can tap into the underpinning nested vortices, they work as accelerators. Okay? And that's when you can really start to tap into the Aetheron, I believe. Let's see what else we got here. More beautiful images of this torus. I wish I had all day to really explain to you the beauty and complexity of what these numbers define, how you can make waveforms that ripple out and make perfect calculations that come back and condense either where they started or on an opposite symmetrical node. Anything like Newton's cradle is an example that you can define with these type of systems. Here's another image showing, this is one I hand drew, showing the underpinning nested vortices. Some of them are compressing, some of them are decompressing. And you always have, at the center, an upright vertical axis. Another way of defining what is mass, it is a frame of reference, if anybody is familiar with that term. It defines the space and time that we're living in, and it is really the source of relativity. And why that is important for why we're here, for energy. And ultimately, you know, one of my interests, big interests, which is travel, for flight. It's because this is the secret to vertical axis propulsion. Okay? Implode, explode, closed system, and it harnesses the secret of the vertical axis, which goes back to that number 9, which is at the apex of the vector. Okay? The Aetheron is always ascending, which is why we have gravity. It's why matter collapses in on itself, because it's being deflected by the ascending Aetheron particle. Okay, another showing of 1/2 of the nested vortices at work, different patterns. This gets into a little bit more of the complex side of the base 10 math. I don't really have time to define all that for you, but it's showing how different what we call family number groups are interrelating to form very specific geometric shapes. In fact, within these toruses, you can define every single geometry that exists and a whole lot that people are probably unaware of. Here is one example of showing, this was again done by Tom Barnett, showing that where this pathway of the z-axis, these emanations are intersecting. And it's a very interesting point, because if you can see this on another torus, I'll show you exactly where that's been observed, which was in the famous Eye of God supernova. You can see that exact same, and along those white lines, pathway. And I had no idea when we did this. I mean, I had no idea that it was going to come out into that shape. I simply did the math, we created the shape, and you can see that eyeball kind of intersection at the middle. Okay? Those are actually the end of my slides. I really condensed this down because I knew we were at limited time, and I wanted to introduce these concepts. Ultimately, I believe that if the etheron is understood, tapped into, I'm very interested in transforming these like plasma coils, a little more higher end technology if the funding becomes available. I believe that you can tap into literally limitless, inexhaustible energy that is truly free, is truly at the source of even free will itself, self-determination, a self-enclosed frame of reference. This is essentially the explanation, as far as I'm concerned, of what the famous flying saucer is, why it is in this shape, and why it moves like it does. And understanding those nested vortices is the key to how to steer it, how to move it. Okay, so I think I'll stop there and let people ask questions, and then we can just sort of see where it goes. Sure.
You mentioned that numbers are a 3D fractal. Could you explain more about that concept?
Sure. So, you know, we learn about numbers traditionally in multiplication series as if they exist in an abstract realm. We learn about 3 apples and 2 oranges and all that. That is what is called numbers as quantity. Okay, and many people talk about quantity versus quality in all aspects of life. Well, numbers are the same way. They do have quantities, but the quantities of numbers as they express themselves are an expression or a result of the qualities of numbers. So the quantitative doubling within a system is an expression of the qualitative doubling. And that means that quantitatively, as it's doubling, it's actually moving as well. It's actually creating geometric lattice structures. And so you can't separate mathematics from 3D space. There's lots of different theories in mathematics. You can read about string theory. You know, I did this TED talk where you know, I was, after some years, it's kind of sparked this censorship mode of TED that they've gone into. I like to...
Were you the first?
As far as I know, myself and there was an economist who was censored by them. Yeah, and we were the first 2 that I think got it. So I was excited, you know. I love confrontation. I'm totally all about it. So I went and I said, all right, this is great. I said, let's have a debate. I got them to bring all their people. We got this huge conference call with all the head people from TED, and there was all these witnesses there who organized the TED that I spoke at. And man, they had nothing. They couldn't answer a single question, and they had no reason for censoring. And why I bring this up is because one of the things they said, well, we can't put this out there because there's no empirical evidence to support it. Well, I said, actually, indeed there is, and now I even have confirmations from universities in Europe who are putting together now a technical manual for us to show that even these simple primitive devices are drawing energy from an unknown, unexplainable source there's no explanation for where it's coming from. They're also able to do things like produce rare noble gases at extremely low voltages, which is, according to them, very unheard of. Things like argon gas. So I said, well, there is actually empirical evidence, but I'm okay with that. But I said, if that's the reason you're censoring me, then you need to take down, like, for example, Brian Greene's talk on string theory, because not only is there no empirical evidence, there's not even any way to even get at how you would figure out how to test that.
What did
right?
they say?
Well, they said, well, but he's famous, And I said, well, so, he's well known. He teaches at a university. I said, well, so is that what it is? I'm not famous enough to say this, And that was just one of about 100 points. And I'm very proud of the fact that some of my friends quit and left that organization over the complete humiliation that was experienced by their closed-mindedness. So thank you.
One last thing. Somebody somewhere had to instigate that. Did that ever come out?
Yeah, it was a group of science bloggers online, and if you read the blogs, they sent me the blogs. I said, well, let me read them. They sent them to me. There's not one criticism of anything that I said. It's total ad hominem. They'll just quote me and go, this guy's crazy. I was like, that's scientific discourse, And I told them, I said, let's have a public debate. I'm open. I said, I'll debate anybody. And Rupert Sheldrake did this too. He got censored much later, but they won't engage. Yeah, they won't engage on that level. I said, if I'm so fallacious, then you should expose me to the public and let's just squash this once and for all. But they didn't. They were a little intimidated by that, I guess. Sure.
I noticed that the universe is particular and spinning.
Does somebody have a microphone you can give them?
Oh yeah, I think was there one up here?
There used to be another one. It's coming. Oh, here it comes. Here comes the microphone. So we can hear,
It seems like everything in the material, everything in the universe is spinning. It's verticular, like the Earth is spinning, the Sun is spinning, the solar system, galaxy, and who knows about the universe? Is it spinning as well? What's causing it? Does every material object have like an in and out, like energy is flowing in through the ether? And then it's also, I believe it's been demonstrated that matter, that matter or energy is coming out of matter, like photonic energy or whatever. So
yeah, there's a radiation side to it, and there's an implosion and an explosion. As many people say at these conferences, we're good at tapping into the explosion side. It's a lot easier. The implosion side is much more difficult for people to tap into, or at least at the approach that they're taking. But the truth is everything has to implode before it explodes. Now, as far as rotation and spin, I believe that this, what we call these flux fields, flux magnetic fields, are at the source of, as I said before, time, motion, and vibration. So what's happening is that the linear pathway, the penetration of this energy, is deflecting matter. Where this energy is, matter cannot be. Okay, that's why there's a hole at the center. If you didn't have a hole, everything would be log jammed. Things wouldn't be able to move. It's because things aren't really based on a duality or a polarity like we think. It's always a trinary. There's always three parts to the system, and that three is the minimum that you can have to create a living, moving system. Which are the three? Well, numerically, we define them by the 3, 9, and 6. Though there are other that's how we define what we call family number groups, which I go into in a lot of my work. There are 3, 9, 6, 1, 4, 7, and 2, 5, and 8. But essentially, the 3, 9, 6, which was referred to by Nikola Tesla famously, he said, I'll probably misquote it a little bit, but something to the effect of, if humanity could understand the 3, 9, and 6, they would understand the secrets of the universe. And that's indeed what we found, is that the 3, 9, and 6 are a separate system. They're not a physical, they don't have physical mass. And so they are defining what is deflecting and causing everything to curve and warp back in on itself, and then eventually to explode and expand back out the other side.
He said an in and out in the center.
Yeah, an in and out in the center. Yeah, exactly. You could think of it that way. That there's always the hole, the 0 or the 9. Yeah. Yes, sir. Okay, sure.
So, you were talking about the importance of 3, 6, and 9. Just curious with the idea of shearing in these rodent coils, where you have uninsulated copper touching themselves, and the nodes and antinodes are canceling out, much like the Nikola Tesla hairpin experiments he was doing with ultra-high frequencies.
That's great point, and I didn't mention that in the talk. I'll show you some images. So what we get, he asked about, he used the word shearing. There's a term that's been coined within BBM, Marco coined it, called harmonic shearing. Okay, and it's not understood at all in terms of electrical engineering. These coils are very unique because we claim you can actually have two conductors side by side touching one another, and their resonance is so perfect that they won't short out. Okay? Because this thing is not all on at one time. Okay? It has a phasing. It has a sequencing. Okay? So when one circuit is on flowing in, the other ones are off. Then that one is off. Then there's another path flowing outward, decompressing. And then they're both off, and that's when the flux field is active. What that does, and mathematically, I shouldn't get too far into how it works numerically, but what we're able to see in these thick black lines here is what we call a harmonic shear, which means there's always a constant value there. And it means that there's a boundary condition there. These underpinning nested vortices shear against one another. It's very important when you look at this image that the vortices do not line up. They are staggered, like the teeth of a shark, which is what makes it grip. It's what holds things together. And that is essentially what the etheron energy is. It is the glue that holds the universe together. And it creates these world boundary condition, shears. And those shears create extreme amounts of power in a small space. Yes, sir?
Randy, is there an importance to the size of the hole or the ratio of the hole in the center to the donut itself?
Absolutely, yeah.
How
And
does that affect the effect of the vortex?
well, experimentally, we haven't fully determined that. But I'll tell you about it mathematically. It's very important, and you know, you're going to right to the advanced part of the math. Now, these are primitive hand-drawn images that are not precise geometrically. Even the ones that are out there on the computer-generated images that we have now, because you know, half the guys I've been working with for years here, this is the first time that we've met in person because there's no funding apparatus around this project in that sense. I do know how to define that, and it depends on the type of torus. The discovery that I made showed that there's an extreme amount of variation in this, which is what we wanted to find, because obviously going from a donut to all of this, there's a lot of variation involved. So really the size of that hole can vary, and we see that in nature. You can have a hole like in that cavitation bubble that's roughly 1/10 the size of the outer diameter, or you can have like a black hole type system where it's you know, a septrillionth or whatever, tiny, tiny, tiny hole with a huge, huge outer radius. And I believe that that absolutely increases the power of the system. You know, when you're talking to the practical people out there who are trying to wind coils, though, they're not too keen on that tiny hole. But when we get into 3D printing, when we get into other types of engineering, that's going to become easier to do. And ultimately, I believe that is the key to hot fusion, because it controls the temperature, it regulates it, and it concentrates it at the center, and it keeps the outside cool. Probably have time for one more.
So
Go ahead.
just what are your thoughts on Daniel Nunes's observation of the powder that gets collected? Have you any thoughts on that, since you mentioned that the temperature is so high on the inside?
About the powder that gets collected?
That he found, you know, on the inside of these coils that seems to collect that.
Yeah,
do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't specifically, but there's so many interesting effects that we've seen out of these that, you know, and as advanced as this is, and this is, again, very basic. I've gone so far into this mathematically as far as prime numbers, which I really wanted to talk about today, but there's just no time for it. There's so much advanced work in the math, and yet at the same time, we're barely even scratching the surface of what we know and understand about this. Our goal is to really create a community around this. I'll just say this one thing, and I'll take this one last question, and then we'll probably have to wrap up. We are producing a film that we're going to be releasing online. It's called Randy's Donuts. I didn't give it that name, but there's a big joke around that. If you're from LA, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, it rolled across the screen in the 2012 film, and everybody was real excited. And then Iron Man had his coil that it was messed up, and I got so many emails like, you gotta go see Iron Man. And so I went and saw it, and then it goes and sits in the Randy's Donuts, and everybody got a big kick out of that. So the film's called Randy's Donuts. Actually, I believe today or tomorrow, or in the next couple of days, is the last days we're going to have for the crowdfunding. But you guys can look that up online, or check me out on Facebook, and all that information is on there if you're interested in being a part. This project is like no other because we are a truly open source project. We are as destitute as you could possibly be. I'm not proud of it, it just is what it is. But it's because we're really committed, as my friend Michael here is as well, we're very committed to the operative word, which is free energy. We're committed to the community, to the sharing. We're committed to doing something from the heart that's true and real and genuine, because that's the only way I believe that we can all come together, get over all the ego junk, and get together and make it happen, you know? Thank you. I just have this one last here, and I'd be happy to take yours two after if we're out of time.
Waiting for a while.
Okay, go ahead, and we'll do these two, and then, can I get time to do two? Okay, we'll do two.
You said that 3D reality is a trinary system, and it maps to the surface of the torus. Other dimensions of time and space, do they also map to the surface, and are they also trinary or something else?
Yeah, that was what I was getting to in the point I was making earlier about string theory. You know, there's a lot of thoughts about different dimensions. I'm a little bit, maybe I'm old school or whatever. I actually don't believe in all these extra dimensions. In fact, I don't believe that you can actually logically postulate something that you cannot conceive. You know, you can postulate something that you maybe haven't perceived, but you can conceive of it. But if you can't conceive of it, which no one has ever conceived of 5 dimensions, or, you know, they make these tesseracts and things, but they're all 3-dimensional. And the point is, you have 3D, and the higher dimension defined by the 396 is what we call the omni-dimension. But it is not in any way akin to, you know, it is non-local in that sense. So you have 3D, which is the physical reality, or any sort of, even if it's a, some people when they say dimensions, maybe they mean a higher frequency or something that's invisible to us. But to me, that's still a part of a 3D reality. In any sort of bounded reality, to me, the 3, and this, I can get into the hardcore math arguments about why this is and why 3 is the sole unique prime number that defines why we use base 10, because it's the first true prime squared, which is 9, right? Modular 9 math. But essentially, yes, you have 3D, which is the physical world, and then you have the omni-dimension, which is the energetic world. And that omni-dimension is only dimensionalized, per se, where it intersects with the third dimension. So I hope that's a pretty decent answer.
It's like TV and radio. It's all in the same space, just different frequency bands.
Right, right. Okay, one last one.
You brought up conventional plasma reactors, and I'm curious about your thoughts about the perceived enhancements that VBM could provide to current reactors and the changes, and your thoughts on the changes. You said you're not an engineer yourself, but just to complement, you know, some ideas that you may have about enhancing current plasma reactors as the plasma is rotating in the center of the torus, inside the torus, and in current plasma reactors, whereas it seems like there's magic inside the center of the torus. And
sure.
So,
well, it's somewhat similar, and obviously I'm not an expert on plasma reactors. For those of you who don't know, this isn't totally an obscure idea because toroidal reactors are all over the place. I mean, there's a big, huge one up at the University of Wisconsin. There is the tokamak, all these different types of toroidal fusion reactors. So this is something that mainstream science is somewhat onto, and you know, but they're doing it similar to how things are done in electrical engineering. You could make the analogy where they're using magnets to push the energy, to push the plasma or to push the electricity through the medium. So in the case of a coil, you're using the magnet to push it through the wire. And what we discovered in this, and what many people know, or even if you do martial arts or something, pull is always stronger than push. No one likes to be pushed. You know, the pulling, the coercion side is much stronger force. And the ability to tap into that is largely a matter of the geometric pathway that it's moved in. So most of these fusion reactors, they get so hot so quick. I mean, they can only activate them for a very small frame of time. And it's because they're using magnets moving vertically and horizontally to excite and move the plasma, and that's causing it to move in a way that creates a lot of friction, a lot of heat loss. Okay? If you can move and I don't know how you would necessarily enhance the current design, but if you started building off of these principles to begin with, moving the plasma along the pathway that it actually is seeking to go naturally will eliminate random collision, the particles will eliminate the friction and will concentrate the heat to the center and then regulate the temperature. And so this is the same essential principle of how it would be used in that. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate your time and attention.